During the times of Noah, the world was consumed with corruption, greed, murder, sexual immorality, and more. So God made the decision to destroy the world with a great flood. Unbeknownst to many people, the flood waters would actually be boiling hot. However, not all of humanity would be wiped out. Noah, the most righteous man among all of the wicked of the earth at that time, and his family would be saved. They would find refuge on an ark God instructed Noah to build. It would also house all of the animals, even the creepy crawling things. Well, we all know the tale says that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. It was actually after a year when Noah, his family, and all the animals were finally able to leave the ark. After which point, God made a covenant with Noah, and that covenant is represented by a rainbow. We can find this covenant in Genesis chapter 9, verses 11 through 13. And I will establish my covenant with you, and never again will all flesh be cut off by the flood waters. And there will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant, which I am placing between me and between you, and between every living soul that is with you for everlasting generations. My rainbow I have placed in the clouds, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between myself and the earth." The story of Noah's Ark and the Great Flood is probably one of the top 10 most famous Bible stories that everybody is aware of. However, there is actually another mention of the rainbow in the Tanakh, specifically Ezekiel chapter 1. Now, is there any mention of the rainbow in the Christian Bible? It turns out that they actually do mention the rainbow in the book of Revelations. We are going to break all of this down. What is the Jewish understanding of the rainbow, and what do the Christians have to say about it? Okay, so we're actually going to start to see what the Tanakh has to say about it first before we get into the New Testament. Ezekiel 1, it's actually in verse 28 that it mentions the rainbow, but we are going to start in verse 27 just for context. Okay, from what appeared as the loins up, I saw a gleam as of ember, what looked like a fire encased in a frame. And from what appeared as the loins down, I saw what looked like fire. There was a surrounding radiance. Verse 28, like the appearance of the bow that shines in the clouds on a day of rain, which is the rainbow. That's what they're talking about here. So clearly Ezekiel is having a vision here, and as we all know, when prophets communicate a vision, it's akin to someone explaining their dream. All of this is going to be kind of in dream symbols. So two people could receive the exact same message prophetically in these scenarios, but see different symbols because it's communicating to that very particular person. So while Ezekiel saw a rainbow, somebody else may have seen something different. But the point is, when he says right here, it was the semblance of the presence of God, that's how we know what this symbol is supposed to mean. And it actually makes sense that Ezekiel saw a rainbow because of what the rainbow actually represents and what it means. Let's take a look at the Jewish understanding of the rainbow. So on the one hand, when the rainbow is represented first, immediately after the flood of Noah, it's in a bit of a negative context, right? Hashem clearly tells Noah that the rainbow will appear at times when he deems the world worthy of destruction. So it basically serves as a reminder for everybody that even though the world should be destroyed at that very moment, Hashem has promised not to destroy the world otherwise. So then why do we say a blessing whenever we say a rainbow? Because this is something that we actually do. Well, the answer lies in the actual words to the blessing, which is, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who remembers the covenant and is faithful to his covenant and keeps his promise." So right there, that's exactly why we say this particular blessing whenever we see a rainbow. But why does Ezekiel mention it? How is this all connected to Ezekiel? I mean, after all, because this rainbow does have such a negative connotation, there's even a Jewish law that states that if a person sees a rainbow, he should not tell anyone else. And if you want further proof that it's actually connected to judgment, you could see when the rainbow did not appear, right? So it says, like, during times of righteous people, such as Shimon Bar Yochai, they didn't see a rainbow because there was no reason to cast a judgment that would call for them to be annihilated because they were very righteous. So what's the deal? Should we be depressed and all sad when we see a rainbow? Absolutely not, because you should be more optimistic about it. It's saying that, look, even though you're not perfect and you can go way off the path, you could still perform teshuvah, you can repent, you can fix the error of your ways as best as you can. I'm not going to destroy you. I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that. Now, in Christianity, they teach that you have to accept their man-God deity in order to achieve some sort of salvation, when God's saying, I'm just going to let you live and have time to get it right, which makes more sense, all right? But aside from all of that, this is how it connects to Ezekiel, okay? The secret to that is actually in Hagigah 16a. So here's what it says. It is taught in the Mishnah, whoever has no concern for the honor of his maker deserves to have never come to the world. The Gemara asks, what is lack of concern for the honor of one's maker? Rabbi Abba said, this is one who looks at a rainbow. Then it goes on further to state, looking at a rainbow constitute an act of disrespect towards the divine presence. As it is written, as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And then they themselves reference Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 28. And it is a dishonor to God to stare at his likeness, which is why we do not stare at a rainbow. And I got this teaching from Aish.com. I would recommend that anybody go and check them out. Now, let's see what the New Testament has to say. Okay, now this is where it's going to get kind of fun. So in the New Testament, it actually references the rainbow twice. In the book of Revelations, in chapter 4 and again in chapter 10. After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. At once, I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with something sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. That sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumbles, and peals of thunder. That sounds a bit familiar too. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These were the 7 spirits of God. Also in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. So far, it sounds a lot like Ezekiel, but then it says, in the center, around the throne, were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes, in front and in the back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Wait a minute. This is starting to sound exactly like Ezekiel. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. Day and night, they never stopped saying, blah, 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 blah. Okay, great. Thanks, Book of Revelations. Now let's look at what Ezekiel had to say, because this sounds exactly like that. The plagiarism is just painfully obvious. On the top, I've got the New Testament. On the bottom of this, I've got Ezekiel chapter 1 from the Tanakh. Okay, so in the blue highlighted area, that's the New Testament. It says a creature like a lion. Oh, and look, it says like a lion also in the book of Ezekiel. Then John allegedly says there is a creature like an ox. And oh, look, Ezekiel also saw a creature like an ox highlighted right there for you in green. And it just keeps going and going, right? The face of a man, of course, the Tanakh says that each of them had like a human face. Ezekiel mentions an eagle below in green. So, of course, John is also going to mention an eagle above in blue, right? Also in Ezekiel chapter 1, Ezekiel describes something like burning coals of fire. So in the New Testament, John's going to say the appearance of jasper and ruby, which a ruby is red and jasper can be multiple colors, such as red and even crystal clear, giving that same impression of a burning ember or like coals of fire. Ezekiel mentions lightning, so of course John's going to have to mention lightning. So from the throne came flashes of lightning. And finally, another example, Ezekiel says the fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving. And then John says in front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. Torches, lamps, fire, meh, all plagiarism. So what's the deal with John? All right, let's figure out like where he's receiving these visions from. And we could just look at the very first verse in chapter 1 of Revelations. It says the revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. Okay. All right. Just full stop. This is hilarious. Okay. So with Ezekiel, he's actually having visions of God, but not with John. So it's a revelation from Jesus Christ. Okay. Which God gave him. Who's him? So God gives the vision to Jesus, and then Jesus takes it and passes it to an angel, and then that angel gives it to John, and then John gives it to you. Does that really, are you really buying that? Does that really make sense to you? Not to mention that it seems that the revelation from Jesus Christ was a direct plagiarism from Ezekiel? Come on! You have to see this for the fraud that it is. And by the way, when was this written? What's going on with John? So the book of John is said to be dated between 90 and 100 AD, making it well after the other books of the New Testament were written and well after the passing of Yeshua. But is it the same John as John the Baptist? So I went to a well-known Christian site called Got Questions. If I had gone to a secular site or an academic site, that would have been easily dismissed. But I want you to see what this says here. So there are actually several Johns that have allegedly been writers and participants in the New Testament, and those writings are regarded as the Johannine authorship. However, what this website suggests is that John the Apostle stands out as a prominent figure in early Christianity. He would not have required further clarification in using his name, otherwise suggesting that this is indeed John the Baptist, okay? And why do they state that there would be no further clarification in using his name? Because the author of the book of Revelations simply identifies himself as John. He didn't give himself a title like John the Baptist or John the Evangelist. He didn't do any of that. It's just John. So therefore, they assume that John the Apostle stands out as a prominent figure, and therefore that's why he didn't need to clarify his name. But here's something really interesting I want to show you, okay? One thing that a lot of scholars agree on is that none of this was written during the time of Yeshua. That this book was written 95 to 100 years after the alleged, crucifixion of Yeshua. So here's something that I've noticed, and I want to see what you guys think. You guys can tell me in the comments, okay? If all of the books of the New Testament were written well after Yeshua's time, especially the book of Revelations, which may have been written close to 100 years later, what if the entire character concept of John was hijacked from the writings of Josephus Flavius? What if Josephus Flavius' writings inspired the New Testament? Because there is something I noticed about John the Baptist, John the Bible, the one who may have even written the book of Revelations, and something Josephus Flavius actually wrote. Okay, now this is according to Josephus Flavius. Josephus said this, not me. But let's just see what Josephus had to say. He said, "When I was informed that one whose name was Bannus lived in the desert," Luke 1 verse 8, he confirms this fact. Then Josephus goes on to describe what he wears and eats. He says, "And used no other clothing than grew upon trees, and had no other food than what grew of its own accord." Now let's see how John dressed and ate according to the New Testament. Well, it says John's clothes were made of camel's hair, and he had a leather belt around his waist. His food was locust and wild honey. So they changed the actual source of John's clothing, right? Because Josephus says this Bannus guy only wore stuff that grew from trees, and they're saying that this John, who also grew up in the desert, just like Bannus, all right, wore camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist. However, that clearly was not the normal attire. They were not a bunch of Jews just running around in a bunch of, camel skins throughout the desert. That was not a thing that was happening. This was specific to John, because what it's saying is, look, he wore really weird stuff because he was like a wild man in the desert living on his own, like a weird hippie. And that's exactly what Bannus was described as being. Now, if we go back to see what Josephus Flavius has to say about Bannus, he goes on to continue to explain to us that Bannus would bathe himself in cold water frequently, both by night and by day, in order to preserve his chastity. So clearly, this kind of narrative could inspire a story, somebody who's spending all day and all night, frequently, bathing himself in the water. That could inspire a John the Baptist narrative. Because even if we go back to the book of Matthew, it says people went out to him from Jerusalem and all of Judea and the whole region of the Jordan, confessing their sins. They were baptized by him in the Jordan River. Do you know how many people that is? You would have to be spending a frequent amount of time in a river, which I guarantee you the Jordan River is gonna be cold, right? It's not a heated river for your comfort. And it's also described in the exact same order. So Josephus Flavius describes Bannon's clothing, what he eats, and how much time he spends in the water. Matthew describes John's clothing, what he eats, and how much time he's spending in the water. The only difference is that Matthew changes the material of the clothing and the reason that this individual is spending time in the water. That's the only thing. But to tell me that that's a coincidence, I'm not buying it. So I think that whoever plagiarized Josephus Flavius also plagiarized Ezekiel when they wrote the book of Revelation and just said, oh, it was John writing it. Or maybe even Josephus Flavius himself is the inventor and creator of some of these narratives. We'll never know. One thing is absolutely for sure, though. The New Testament is communicating strictly anecdotal material that has nothing to do with whether Yeshua or Jesus Christ actually qualified to be Messiah or not. All of this just is simply written so that your brain will connect the dots with the real holy book called the Tanakh, so that you confuse what's real and you don't understand it anymore, because when you see something that sounds exactly like the Tanakh, your brain says it's legitimate when it's really not. It's anecdotal, it's a distraction, it's to trick your mind into thinking that it's written in the same language, communicating the same things as the Jewish people. But it's plagiarism. It's fake, it's fictional. Yeshua did not qualify to be Messiah. The rainbow in the New Testament is entirely irrelevant. All right, guys, well, let me know what you think about all of this in the comments. And thanks for watching.